today I'm going to talk and look at the 70-20-10 model. Just to start with, I'll just give you a little introduction into me. So my name is Jayne McPhillimy. I'm principally a learning and development consultant. I've worked in sort of large and small businesses, and I've held senior leadership roles as well. So I come at this very much from putting it into practice, practical, having lived and breathed it, not just sort of a theory. And my business now is around that learning and development consultancy, and I sort of aim to create learning businesses. So really everything I do builds in that 70-20-10. And sometimes I deliver that through, I do leadership development programs. Leadership's a key theme for me. And when I'm doing that, it's with a 70-20-10 program of learning. And with leadership coaching, that's a specialist area that I do for sort of senior execs that want to develop their leadership skills. It's very much around the 20 of that, but I frame it for them within the 70-20-10. So that's a little intro to me. So moving on to the 70-20-10 itself, we'd like to start off with a poll. So quite interested to know from this audience what your sort of current experience of 70-20-10 is, so that we can kind of gauge where we might need to pitch today. So just seeing the options. So, oh, lovely. People are straight onto it. Fantastic. So the options we've got, I've never heard of it before. So we've got 50. Oh, it's dropping. I've heard of it, but I'm not sure what it's all about. I'm aware of it and want to know. I've got a good understanding of 70-20-10. If anybody clicks in there, then I'll know that I can ask them questions as well. Oh, great. We've got someone. Fantastic. So quite a good split then. Have people finished responding? Yeah. So quite a good split. So we've got a few people who've never heard of it before, so that's great. I hope you'll get a good introduction to it today. A couple that have heard but not sure what it's all about, so I hope you'll learn a little bit more today. We've got quite a few who are aware of it but want to know more, so fab, I hope you'll learn more from today. And the person who's, we've got one person who says they've got a really good understanding of it, so it'd be lovely to, for you to join in with answers as well alongside me if you've got experience of using it, because we may have used it slightly different ways. So that's fantastic, thank you very much. So we'll start the session off. I did set some objectives which I put into the information that went out to you all. So I'm not going to read those out, so I'll just ask Liz to lift those 4 up for us. And then the next one, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover what is it all about, what is 70-20-10, what do we mean, how does it work, so why would you use it, what difference should it make, what could it look like, so I've got some examples of ways that I've actually used it in businesses and very practical things which you could take to make it work for your business. And then sort of what are the benefits. So, and I'd really, for some of you who've seen it, I'd really like your input into that as well. And really, it'd be great to know at the end of this webinar, kind of maybe one thought or one idea that the webinar has generated for you that you might like to take forward, because it's really great to understand something around what are the challenges for the people that for developing people in your business, and maybe what elements of 70-20-10 do you see as working well for your business. So we'll wait until a little bit later in the webinar to maybe start asking some of those questions. But they're the types of questions that we'd like to know. So what do we already know about? So the next slide is where are we now? Oh, we need a poll. Okay. We're asking a poll here about what's happening with training budgets. So we've got a fairly consistent answer there. So, oh no, we've got a couple more coming through. There might be a couple more coming through yet. So yeah, so I know businesses, so in the last few years of the recession, a lot of businesses had to find different ways to deliver training, and that really did make 70-20-10 very interesting for them, because it was a way of saying to businesses, actually, you don't have to think of yourselves as not doing development of people, that there actually are ways you can be developing people, and it doesn't have to have a massive budget. So we've got a few people with a budget, some with a limited budget, and some with no specific. So I've just got a little bit of background noise. Okay, I think it's fine. It's gone now. That's lovely. Thank you. Okay. So, so it's interesting to see, because even as things are getting a little bit easier with the economy, it is interesting to see that a lot of businesses are still looking to develop, and being very sensitive to training budgets. Super. So where are we now? So it tends to be most businesses that I talk to still think about learning in terms of delivering structured courses, things that people, know that they're going to go on and they book onto them and they pay an amount for them or they provide them in-house. That still seems to be quite a strong way in which people look at learning. And the problems with that are that you have to plan for it. Sometimes you have to buy it in. You might have costs associated with booking somewhere for it to take place, booking a train. So it tends to be inflexible and costly. So this is not to say there isn't a place for that type of training, but in terms of being responsive with the business, it's a difficult way to work. So, and also when you're sending people on courses, especially with smaller businesses, it can be really difficult for them to find time to allow somebody away from the business for, say, a whole day. And you've got to fill that capacity while they're not with you. And then it's challenging for them to put into practice what's covered on the course. So sometimes people go away on courses, they spend the whole day doing the course, they come back and actually there isn't the opportunity maybe for them to put what they learned into practice as quickly as you would like, and so some of the learning can be lost as a result of that. And it also, when you have that kind of approach, it restricts people to around thinking that they've not had any development because they've not been on a course. And this is one of the key things with 70-20-10 that goes alongside it, is this changing of people's thinking from I've only had training and development when I've been on a course. And 70-20-10, one of the things it does is help to kind of challenge that as well. So some people didn't know very much about it, so we've got a little diagram here. It gets represented in a number of ways, and there was something very similar to this on the advert as well. So the first area, it breaks it into three areas, and what it's saying is the 70-20, the 70 is about learning in time, at the time, skills and knowledge that you need now. So that first block should come up. Yeah, there we go. So it's learning through doing the role. You face new challenges and you resolve them. So it's being very flexible in your approach to learning, recognizing that there's lots of activity that we undertake that is developing us. So every time we come across a new flavor to a product, a new requirement from a customer, a different way of answering a question, actually we could be doing more learning than we realize, and we rarely actually recognize that we're learning when we do this. It's just part of our day-to-day, and when you start people recognizing that that's part of their learning, actually they then start to take on a bit more about, oh, actually I am learning and these are other things I do to learn. The second element is learning through others, so networks, conversations, knowing the right people. So flexing, so it could be networks, it could be somebody in a different department, it could be a mentor, a coach, but here you're actually, rather than finding the answer yourself, which you do in the 70, you're going and you're engaging with other people to find the answer, and that's where the 20 comes from. And then 10% is your formal learning, your structured programs. And the key thing here between the 70-20 and the 10 is that the 70 and the 20 are the informal learning. So it's not particularly planned and organised and structured. It happens because it's needed at that point in time. And then the 10% is the more I'm planning some specific development for my future, and that's going to happen at a certain point in time. So that makes a difference. Can I just ask people for some comments in the chat box around, does that make sense to you? The way that I've described those three different areas. It'd be great to see if that's coming across clearly for you. Yeah, thank you, Eloise. And Georgie? Excellent. So that's making sense. That's fab. So the next slide gives us just a few more examples about what that could look like. So when you're new in a role, an awful lot of your learning, you might start off with an induction program, and that might be quite formal, so that might be a bit of your 10%. But once you're actually then put in the job and you need to do it, most of your learning will come from that 70% and a bit of the 20 to support you. And you'll be learning just because everything that you do probably has a new flavour to it. So at that point in your career, you're learning loads. If you move up into a new role, take on new responsibilities, an awful lot of what you learn is you have to deal with something, and you learn by doing it, and you might then go and talk to somebody before you do it. So it's still learning. As you get a bit more experienced in role, then actually you can still provide development through experience. And there's some ideas here on the right of the types of things that that could involve. So asking somebody to solve a problem. So if there's something that keeps happening in your organisation, oh, this always goes wrong, we keep getting this problem, actually give that to somebody and see if they can come up with a solution. Special or stretch assignments, so giving people still within the same role something new to work with. Introduce them to other departments or roles, or get them to write the development guide or the manual, because I can tell you, there's no better way of telling whether or not you understand something than when you try to help somebody else to understand it, or you start to look into all the problems around it and try to think, well, if this happens, what do I do, and if that happens? So that's a great way, still developing people and then helping them to recognise that that is part of their development. The 20 can come from things like mentoring. So mentoring is very much about working with an expert in that area. And reverse mentoring, is that something people know about, reverse mentoring? It's one of my favourite leadership development tools. So we've maybe got somebody who thinks that they've used reverse mentoring. So yeah. So while I think it's Natalie's typing for us at the moment. Thanks, Natalie. Reverse mentoring is where maybe you get a senior member of the organisation or the business to actually be mentored by a more junior member. And it's a mentoring relationship, so probably they're both getting benefit from it. But actually what it's doing, it's allowing that more senior person to get a real understanding of what's happening in their business and what it's like to work in their business, and that's a really great development opportunity for a more senior person. Coaching could be business manager coaching, could be external coaching, networking through either internal groups or external groups, memberships and professional organisations and associations are great ways to keep yourself up to date in your particular business sector. And learn new things, which maybe then you can tell somebody else about. And action learning groups is groups of people coming together who want to develop in a similar area and sort of challenging themselves. So those are all examples around the 20%. And then the 10% is, as I said before, your formal courses and programs. And that extends nowadays beyond being in a classroom, a traditional classroom, to more being on e-learning platforms as well. This webinar is definitely one of those. So, yeah. I'd actually say this webinar is a bit of 20 as well, potentially, because it's an opportunity to engage with others and talk about something. So that's great. So I'm going to ask you a little bit later on about maybe your favourite route to learning. So you could be thinking about that as we're going along. So that's to give you hopefully a really good idea about what 70-20-10 is about. So now I'd kind of like to move on to why. Why do you do 7? Why does it work? So there's lots of research about brains and how brains work. And there's one guy called Ebbinghaus. I don't know whether anybody's heard of Ebbinghaus, maybe a few. So Ebbinghaus did a piece of research which is now known as Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. And what he did was he gave people a certain amount of information, and then he checked them to see how much of that information they could recall at periods of time afterwards. So the next little bit shows us a graph, and you can see that at the end of the dissemination of the information, people had 100% recall. And quite often what happens on training courses, you get to the end of it and somebody gives you a test and you pass. Yay! Okay? But if I gave you the same test maybe 20 minutes later, what he found was that after 20 minutes, that recall had dropped to only 60%. After an hour to 50%. After 9 hours, it was down to about 37%. And then from about 6 days onwards, people could only recall about 20% of what they learned. So, and the key to it is that if people don't use what they've learned very quickly after they've learned it, then they are unlikely to retain a lot of it. So this is where, to my mind, courses do fall down quite a lot, because people go on a course, they maybe spend half a day or a whole day, they might cover 6 or 8 topics, and then they go back to work, and straight away they're into work, and there's all the stuff that they didn't do while they're on the course sitting there, which they have to sort out before they can even think about how they're going to use the course. So this is one of the reasons why 70-20-10 works, is because we're asking people to use what they have learned immediately. So it's the need for learning leads the actual learning experience rather than planning something ahead, which I might do something with. And I'd just like to say that I'm not anti-courses at all. Courses definitely have their place, but for learning in the workplace and for performance and getting great performance from people and getting them developing, I'm really very fond of 70-20-10 and the 70-20 part of it. So if people can put skills into practice almost straight away, then they will retain that learning. And what 70 and 20 do is, because it's informal learning, I've got a need, I'm learning it now, they get to put it into practice straight away. The chances are they won't need to learn that again, that they will then be able to automatically do it the next time or with a very quick reference, and then they've also built that up to maybe explain to somebody else later. So I'm just wondering how familiar that sounds to everyone, that losing learning after being on a course. So I'm guessing that probably everybody here has been on a course and then maybe had that experience of coming back to work and finding it difficult to put things into practice. So I'm interested in any comments if that sounds familiar. Either you've experienced it yourself or you've seen that happen in your organisation, where maybe they don't get the return on that investment as quickly as possible. Has anybody got any thoughts on that they want to share in the chat room? That sound familiar? Yeah, it could be you, could be your staff on training courses. Okay, so so maybe not. Okay, so or maybe it's not the it does, is it? Yeah. So it's funny. I can see a couple of people are typing, so please do keep typing if you're writing something in. It'd be great to see what you think. Okay, so we'll move on and we'll come back to that. I can see someone is typing there, so that's great. Oh, completely agree, which is why I'm listening today. Thank you very much. Okay, lovely. So how does 70-20-10 work then? So, so the key question that sometimes people ask me is, well, how do we manage that? How do we know what people are going to need and when they're going to need it? And the answer to that question is that you don't really manage it. You kind of facilitate it. So what you're trying to do is move your people towards looking for their opportunities to learn rather than sitting and waiting for what's going to be given to them. So there's a real change in mindset. So, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes quite a bit of time to get there. But instead of people kind of just sitting and waiting or even having almost like a menu that they choose from, they start to pull the learning that they want rather than waiting. So they are, you know, they choose when, how, and where they learn. So I've got an example here, which I'd like you to look at. So it will come up on the screen in the middle. It's on the next slide. Lovely. So I've done as an example learning about 70-20-10. So let's imagine our little person here wants to know more about 70-20-10. So there are a number of times when they might want to learn about that depending on their role. So it's, when is their best opportunity to learn? Is it at that moment while they're at work? Is it they're out on the move and they need to know something? Or actually are they at home thinking about something? Then there's some examples of how they might learn it. So, and this is not an extensive list, these are some examples. So they might learn they might use their PC, their laptop, their tablet, etc. They might look at a book. And they might use the resources that we've listed there. So you've got the internet, e-learning, blogs, knowledge banks, mentors, etc. So there's a few there. So I'm just wondering for you guys here on the phones, listening to this, what's your preferred route to learning? So is it generally at work? Is it generally on a PC? Is it generally using e-learning? Or is it at home on your mobile phone? You know, what's your route through? So if I needed you to learn about 70-20-10 today, what might you choose as your route? So I've got a few coming up. On the job, a colleague helping me understand. That's great. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah. At work by being mentored. Fab. Yeah. There's some more coming up I can see. And I think you can all see what each other are typing as well. Yeah, so we'll let those keep going. Now I'm going to work you through a couple of examples. So the first one I've got on the next slide, this is Katie. She's our team leader. She's seen some information on 70-20-10, but she wants to know and understand a bit more to see if she can use it with her team. So she wants someone to talk to who knows about 70-20-10. So she's going to do this at work. She's going to find somebody who is an expert in it, who's going to have a chat with them. So she arranges a face-to-face with a mental stroke expert, which in this case was someone from learning and development. So that was her route. For that learning at that moment, that was the best route that she could take. So the next slide, then we've got James. And James is head of L&D in a larger organisation. He travels a lot between sites. And he's looking at 70-20-10 as a potential solution to increasing focus on development in his business. So he's on the move, but he's able to access a webinar on 70-20-10 that's happening today. So he's able to access that from his mobile phone, and he's watching the webinar. And the benefits to that, as well as listening, is he can see the questions that other people ask, and he may get some other information and insight from those questions as well. And then lastly, we have Chris. He's a staff member, and he's heard about 70-20-10 being introduced into his organisation. And he gets home and he puts 70-20-10 into YouTube, and he finds a 4-minute clip. This is a hint to you all. If you'd like a 4-minute clip to look at, there's a great one on YouTube. It's called 70-20-10, and it's Charles Jennings. And Charles Jennings was one of the people who developed the 70-20-10, and it's a lovely little video clip. So if you're wanting, great, yeah. Liz is going to put the link out for you. If you want to share something a bit quicker than this with people to give them an idea, I highly recommend it. He covers Ebbinghouse's learning curve as well, which is great. Okay, so that's a little hint for you. So the next section then is really about then developing it into a learning culture. So you're changing this mindset from I sit and I wait to be trained to actually what can I do to develop myself. So as the learning culture builds, you get this pull rather than push content. People get to know where the learning is that they need, and they can get it when they need it. You're accessing learning when it's going to be most effective for them. So you're kind of overcoming the issues that Ebbinghaus identified for us in terms of, people will forget unless they get to put it into practice straight away. And that's, it's at the moment in time learning, and it takes a while to build all of those skills, available to people. But you can have very practical things. You can have process and procedure type information in. You could have things around running a meeting. You could have things around giving feedback. And what you'll want to do if you're introducing it is to start building this collection of resources that people can then add in. There is the occasional other noise, yes. Okay, Liz is just going to mute everyone, and then to unmute your line, press *6 or #6. Thanks, Eloise, for letting us know that, and do let us know again, anybody, if you hear any problems. That's great. So the next slide is I'm starting to look at, so what could it actually look like? So when you're introducing, if you're starting from nowhere, this sounds like a really strange concept for people. What, I've got to find my own learning? How do I do that? What does that look like? And especially if people are thinking, well, I need to be in a classroom, that we still do very much have people feel they haven't been trained unless they've sat in a classroom with a trainer. So it takes a bit of educating to help people to see that there are other ways of learning. So this is an example from one organisation that I worked with, where we produced some tables like this, but for different levels of the organisation. So this one was for like your team member. We then had a different one for team leader. We had one for ops manager, and we had one for senior leader. And we pitched the activities that they might do appropriate to them. So each of the 4 tables look very different. So just have a little read through on the left-hand side. So we've got the 3 columns. We've got learning through experience, which is our 70, learning through others, which is our 20, and then formal learning, which was our 10. And we put in here, we built with the organisation, with people who were team members as well as their managers, things that were going to be practical that they could really do to develop them. And for a lot of people, it gave them new motivation because they started to see that there were ways that they can develop in the area. So I'm just wondering if you'd like to put in there maybe what any that you think you would add to that list, or is there one there that you think, oh, that's a really good idea? We don't do that in our organisation, and perhaps we could do. So if you've got any thoughts around that, we'd love to see them in the chat. Um, so getting people to coach and mentor others, researching issues affecting your business, joining a different team meeting. So they're very practical things that people could do. Then we've got learning through others, so identifying someone skilled in an area you need to develop in. As an example, joining LinkedIn and finding specialist interest groups, joining conversations, arranging a lunch and learn session with ways that people could develop themselves and maybe in some cases even develop others. And then we had the formal learning that was available to them, which was things like there was a customer service course, and there was a great giving and receiving feedback course. And then this was actually a regulated organisation, so they had some regulation policy learning to do as well. So that was in there. So that's an example of how it could look to start people on that journey to thinking about, well, what are the activities that I do that are learning that I never recognise as being learning? Okay. And then the next slide is also then managers play a really vital part in this whole piece, because they often need to have the conversations with people and to change that conversation around from what training can I get to, well, what development can you do to help yourself. So this was an example that I had from somebody who, they were a team member and they desperately wanted to do some project management development. So they had asked on several occasions whether or not they could do a project management course. And instead of just saying yes or no, you can't, they said, well, let's see if you've really got an aptitude for this, if it is everything that you think it is. So they were asked by their manager to think about, to come with some ideas about how they could actually start their route on that development. And these were some of the ideas they came up with. So firstly, we got them assigned to a project which was impacting on their team. So they were now involved in a project which previously they'd just sat on the outside and thought that was quite exciting over there. I'd like to do some of that. And they did that, and they liked that. So then they suggested that they asked if they could then maybe support the project manager for a couple of hours a week in getting the project reports ready. So they got more in-depth knowledge about how the project worked and what the project manager was doing. And then that led on to them running a very small project for a team, because you can almost call anything a project. Anything that you're going to start and finish, you can think of that as a project. So we got them to run a small exercise as a project. They had a mentor to support them, and the longer term story on this is that they have since done some formal project management skills training, so they've done Prince 2, and so now they went onto that training knowing what projects were about, understanding what the training was and knowing how they were going to put that into practice when they came back. So it made that training really effective, and they have moved into a project management role. So the challenge is for the individual really to see where they can learn and get experience from. And then it's also a challenge for the manager to then support the individual in identifying where learning can come from. So at the beginning I said to ask people to think about, what are the challenges for your business in doing this. And one thing that I wouldn't be surprised if I saw was actually getting our managers on board with this, because it requires managers to play a bigger role in terms of helping people to think about, well, where could you get some experience towards that from? How could you do it? And then, in the early days, expecting that you might have to encourage those answers quite a lot. So I hope that's helpful, but that's a nice little way of setting it out. So if you put in the development objective and then you ask people to think about, well, what are your ideas about 70-20 activities that you could do before we look at the training course, because that will kind of get you ready for the training course, rather than people tend to do it the other way around. They do the training and then they come back and think, oh, how am I going to put that into practice? So I hope that was going to be a really practical example for people to use. So, oh, Eloise, thank you. Okay. Yeah, that's great, Eloise. Thank you. Learning from both sides and different products. Too often, are often what this is. Yes. Yes, managers are often very busy, aren't they? But sometimes if they can get through this, I would never shy away from the fact that it creates a hump of activity for a manager. But if they can get over it and they create a learning environment, their teams will start to look after themselves, and it will release time for them. But they do have to invest to start, and it can be helpful to start with a small group of people or one team or one area to show that it's working before you try and do anything across a big team. So thank you, Eloise. That was great. And then just before I go on to the benefits, I'm just going to let Liz page those up as you go through. Yes, it's the next slide. Yeah. So if you just want to just let Liz out. So there are lots of benefits here. I've probably covered most of them, but it'd be great now if maybe more of you could share those your thoughts from those original questions. So, what are the challenges? So we've got some ideas there from Eloise. What's the one thing, thought or idea that the webinar is generating for you? So it'd be great to see some of those examples. And I'll just talk through the benefits while maybe some of you are typing. So, getting people to take control of their learning and see that they can actually make a difference for themselves. Learning will benefit them in lots of ways. Encouraging sharing of learning and experiences. So people start to maybe take on specialisms, and they have a role in the team because they're the expert on a particular area because that's been of interest to them. Recognizing the role everyone can play in improving performance is really about the whole business, thinking about actually as a whole business we improve when we're all learning. Allowing people to learn in a way that works for them. So that's what I was trying to illustrate with the 3 slides where I was showing the how, the when, and the what. Some people still will want some classroom learning maybe as a way of moving towards, and I would then suggest that you facilitate some of the 70-20 stuff within the classroom learning, but getting people to actually move to ways that work for them. Broadening people's views of what learning is, yes. So learning happens all the time. We have all learned something today, even before we came on this webinar, hopefully. So, yeah, Liz and I learned lots about this system. So all the time we're learning, and if we recognise that, and it's not just an event, that's a real change of mindset. It improves development planning, so no longer choosing from a menu. So, some organisations did in the past used to have these are our courses, which one do you want to do? People would get onto that. Move thinking towards what can I do now? Yes, I've got a problem. What can I do about it? Rather than I've got a problem, please can someone help me? So it's moving that, and develops a learning culture in your organisation. So that resources is going to take time to build. But if you let the team members and others build their own resources to some extent, you might want to check some of it. Actually, that they're building what they need rather than what learning and development maybe think they need, or even what their managers think they need. They build their material from their actual need. So can I just read through some of these examples that we've got on here? Okay, so I'm going to read these examples out. So Eloise, we haven't yet tried to encourage learning on the go as such, which will be interesting to consider. Thank you. Sarah Herity, the biggest challenge I think we have is getting people to take responsibility for their own learning and development. It's a big shift, and it kind of doesn't start in, you don't just switch it on one day. It's kind of thinking about a way that you can introduce it and encourage it. Natalie, we need to shift the paradigm for learning, from learning on a course to learning on the job. The biggest challenge is getting the managers to buy into this too. Yes, I'd agree with that, and have some ideas about the way that that can be done. And Jason, encouraging staff who are long in the job and are not looking to progress their careers is a challenge. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And sometimes, sometimes it's more about their motivation, what motivates them, what makes them come to work. I know we all come for money, maybe, hopefully I do. But then what is it about this place that brings us to work? So is it that it's just around the corner, it's really convenient? Is it that they're really established and experienced? There'll be something, yeah, okay. Yeah, so Liz is saying she's got a link to something relevant to that, Jason, so she'll send that on to you as well. So there are ways that you can, it's tapping into the thing that sort of encourages them. And sometimes it is supporting others. And as I said before, one of the best ways to check you know something is actually when you need to train somebody else. And Scott, one thought, our training budgets are shrinking and this model may resonate more and be an easier sell given the access to formal courses won't be there. Yeah, and I think the fact that it is a really effective way to get people to learn because they're going to put things into practice. You know, it's bite-sized pieces as well. It's not days and days of training. It's small, bite-sized, meaningful, practical pieces that make the difference. And Natalie, it's also a challenge to get managers to work with the employee more on development plans. I often see plans that are written by the manager and the employee does not agree with it. Yes, that's a real kind of manager relationships, you know, manager-employee relationships and one-to-ones and managing performance. So thank you very much. Those are really great thoughts, great additions to the webinar. So getting things in place requires at the end we've put management understanding and support and documents that support the conversation. So and I've given some examples of that. So I'd like to hand over now to any questions that people have as a result of the webinar, things that you'd like me to talk about for just a couple of moments now before we finish. We've had some great challenges from you in terms of what you've come back. So are there any specific questions that anybody would like to ask? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we are, while you're just thinking, if you do want to ask any questions, we are looking to do another webinar in September, which will be myself again. And is it September the 30th? And we're just wondering which of these topics might be of most interest. So situational leadership is about how managers can flex their leadership style to suit the individual that they're working with on that task at that moment. So it's a really powerful management tool. Managing projects, so getting into some detail about how to set up and plan and manage a project. If that was popular, we would maybe do it over 2 or 3 webinars. Leading change is looking popular. So, I'd actually say managing projects and leading change are quite similar. So managing projects would be the kind of mechanics of it. The leading change is the hearts and minds piece. So how do I get people ready and how do I help them through the change? So that looks very popular. And then the last option was manager as coach. So as a manager, how can I coach my people so that they become more effective? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe leading change. Yes. Or the other option, we said if anybody had another idea, if you want to type it in the chat box, that would be great. So I'll hand this back to you now, Liz. Okay. Thank you all very much indeed. As my details are on the last slide there, and some other options to talk to me about. So I'd be delighted to hear from anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks everybody for your questions and ideas and challenges and everything else. That was a really, really engaging, great webinar there, so really appreciate it. Please get in touch. You can see the slides on SlideShare. The webinar recordings will be on YouTube and on LinkedIn as well, so please keep in touch on social. Alternatively, by all means, connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Before I go, final second or two, the next webinar is planned for the 8th of September, which is Stepping Up to Leadership, which might coincide quite nicely with the event that Jane's, we just talked about there that most people were interested in, so thank you for that. And then the week after, we'll be looking at appraisals as well. So all that's left really for me to do is thank you very much for your patience today and to wish you all a wonderful summer, and hopefully we'll see you all in September when it starts shining again, this sun maybe. August might be a bit of a wet one, eh? Fingers crossed it's not. So thank you everybody. Look forward to seeing you.